Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in session 6 entitled Provision Given, and our key idea this week is God provides for his people's needs. And we're in Exodus chapter 16, verses 11 through 19, and then skipping the rest of 16 and going to 17, reading verses 1 through 6. We're going to start off by asking the question, it's a little out of left field, why do you think the Who's on First comedy routine is considered a classic? Well, if you're not aware of the Abbott and Costello Who's on First routine, it is a comedy routine that was told over the radio that was all about misdirection and miscommunication. The skit starts with someone asking or saying who's on first. Well, the person on first's name was WHO, and that's the whole beginning of the skit. Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know is on third, and why is in left field. So all of the different players' names were these questions or these phrases that were designed to make it hard for the listener to follow, but also hard for the entertainers to perform, because it's easy to get caught up and misdirected in what is happening in the skit. But anyway, it causes us to go, wait, who actually is on first? Who is the person on first? And the answer to the question is also the question. It is the question in itself. But in our lesson today, we're going to see that God left no question as to who it was providing for the Israelites. So just some context before this. We are now in the wilderness. The Israelites are wandering in the desert or in the wilderness. Moses is leading them. They're going to the promised land. And while they were wandering in the wilderness, they began to grumble or moan or complain. Groan is the actual word here. I combined grumbling and moaning there, groaning. But they began to complain about their situation. They're free, and if you've ever seen the VeggieTales account of this, there's the peas, and the grandpa pea says, it was nice back in Egypt. We should go back to Egypt. We had 3 square meals a day. The work was hard, but we were happy in Egypt. And one of the other peas answers, we were in slavery. They had to be reminded that they were being oppressed and mistreated. They had lost sight of what God had done for them. And so God reminds them here what is going on. He hears their complaints and he says, you know what? I'm going to prove to them that I am their provider, that I am the God that I say that I am, and I'm going to make sure I take care of them and that they know who is taking care of them. So let's begin reading there in verse 11 and read all the way through the end of our passage in chapter 17, verse 6. So verse 11, the Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until you are full. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. So at evening, quail came and covered the camp. Just tons of birds, tons of quail. Think of quail as tiny chickens. They came and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a layer of dew all around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, there were fine flakes on the desert surface, as fine as the frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, what is it? Because they did not know what it was. Moses told them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each person needs to eat. You may take 2 quarts per individual according to the number of people each of you has in his tent. So 2 quarts for the husband, 2 quarts for the wife, 2 quarts for the child, 2 quarts for the other child, for the mother-in-law, whomever. So the Israelites did this. Some gathered a lot, some a little. When they measured it by quarts, the person who gathered a lot had no surplus. The person who gathered a little had no shortage. Each gathered as many as he needed to eat. Moses said to them, no one is to let any of it remain until morning. The entire Israelite community then left the wilderness of sin, moving from one place to the next according to the Lord's commands. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So the people complained to Moses Yet again, give us water to drink. Why are you complaining to me? Moses replied to them. Why are you testing the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water and grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you ever bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? And then Moses cried out to the Lord, what should I do with these people? In a little while they will stone me. The Lord answered Moses, go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take the staff you struck the Nile with in your hand and go. I'm going to stand there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. That's the same mountain where Moses saw the burning bush. That's the same mountain where Moses gets the stone tablets that become the 10 Commandments. I believe that is the same. I will look that up really quick. Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. I believe they're the same. Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb are two names for the same mountain in the Bible, according to most scholars. And it is also known as the Mountain of Yahweh. Sinai means moon and Horeb means sun. And so it's the same mountain. Mount Horeb is the same mountain where Moses saw the burning bush, where he gets the 10 Commandments, and now where he's going to give water to the Israelites. So this is the end of verse 6. When you hit the rock at Mount Horeb, water will come out of it and the people will drink. Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And so God is proving himself to the Israelites. He shouldn't need to, but they are complaining. They're saying that they aren't being taken care of. And he said, all right, fine. I hear you. I'm going to make sure you know that you're never going to have to go without, that you are my people. I've heard the complaining against me or against Moses. And so here's how I'm going to provide for him. And he does. And so we have three sections here. We have provision, instruction, and then more provision. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So let's look again back at verses 11 through 15 of chapter 16 and look at how God provided for the Israelites first. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until you are full. So first he heard the complaints. This is not like complaining like, oh, my feet hurt, or oh, I'm tired of walking. It might be that, but it's not legitimate complaints. These are complaints of obstinance, of being just complaining for complaining's sake, complaining because you don't like your situation, not because you're actually having a hard time with anything. They were being obstinate. The people complained and God heard it. And so God promised them there at the end of verse 12 to give them meat at night and bread in the morning. And he would give them because he would give them all they needed to be filled because he is God. He was providing for them. He was doing what a father does for his children. He was providing for his children. He heard their complaints. He wasn't going to punish them for their complaints. He was going to provide for them instead. And so at evening, quail came and covered the camp. So these quail, they migrate in huge flocks in the Middle East. They are easy to catch when they stop to rest. In God's perfect timing, he allowed these quail to stop at the camp, and they were able to catch them and eat them. And then in the morning, there was a layer of dew all over the camp. And when it finally evaporated in verse 14, there were these fine flakes. And it became known as manna, M-A-N-N-A, which means the question that they asked, what is it? They weren't sure what it was. And so they asked in verse 15, when the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. And they began to call it manna, which means, what is it? And Moses told them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. In Hebrew, the name is similar to the question asked by the Israelites in verse 15, what is it? So manna also continued to appear for the Israelites every morning until they reached the promised land in Joshua, in the book of Joshua. So years and years, 40 years pass, and every morning, they were given daily bread to eat. They were given this manna from heaven to eat. And yes, they complain about it later. They get tired of the manna. Anyone would. But instead of being grateful that their needs were being met, they grumbled and they complained about it. But then they were given some instruction. And we'll get to that in a second. We have a couple of things to ask ourselves first. What are some things that are easy to complain about? Well, it's easy to complain when you're hungry. It's easy to complain when you're tired or when the workload seems too much. Or earlier, I was complaining to Grace about how many dishes there were, knowing full well that I was responsible for, if not all of the dishes, 95% of them. And I looked at her and I said, I really don't want to unload and load the dishwasher today. And she looked at me and she goes, I know, but you're going to, because that's your job. That's what you have set out to do today. She looked at me and said, I don't feel like cleaning up the guest room. Her brother is coming in a couple of days. And I looked at her and I said, I know, but we both put our noses to the grindstone, so to speak, and got our chores done. And the kitchen looks great. I cleaned the sink. It's awesome. It's very clean. It'll be that way for about 6 more hours, and then I'll cook dinner in a little bit. And then it'll be dirty again. And then also she's going to get more yarn for her projects that she's been doing. If you can see, other shoulder, Jax and Nora there behind me. And so there will be more yarn on the guest room at some point. But it's easy to find ourselves complaining even when our needs are being met. It's easy for us to do. That is part of our sinful nature, and we need to combat that. So what do we do when we catch ourselves complaining? Well, for me, I have to remind myself that things could be a lot worse. I could not be married to Grace. I could have a life without her, which would be worse for me. I very much enjoy being married to Grace. And I have to count my blessings. That's why we sing the song, Count Your Many Blessings, name them one by one. Because if we start complaining and we start looking at the things that we wish we had, we stop looking at the things that we do have and that what God has given to us. So when have you found yourself in a wilderness of uncertainty and anxiety? For me, the biggest point of anxiety for me, or moment of anxiety for me in my life, was graduating college and not having a church job right away, and not knowing what I was going to do without that first ministry position. I was so excited about ministry, and I didn't have it right away, and I was upset that I didn't get a ministry position right away, and that caused a lot of anxiety. Like, am I not good enough? Is this not actually my calling? I just spent 4 years going to school for this thing for this degree that will only work in a ministry setting. It's useless everywhere else. But God provided. God gave me a job at Taco Bell. It was not a great experience for me, but God did provide it. And so through that, I learned that God's character is one of provision and one of promise and one of faithfulness. Even when we're going through things that don't seem like they are building us up, things that are tearing us down, God is using them for good if we allow him to. If we see how he is providing for us, then we can, instead of being ungrateful, we can be grateful. And so we can learn that God is going to provide for his children if they are humble, if they allow him to, and if they are not full of pride and complaining. So then we get some instruction. This is verses 16 through 19. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of the manna as each person needs to eat. You may take 2 quarts per individual according to the number of people each of you has in his tent. So get 2 quarts per person, as many people as you have in your tent. So the Israelites did this. Some gathered a lot, some gathered a little. When they measured it by quarts, they found that everyone had all they needed. There was no shortage. There was no excess. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat. And Moses told them, no one is to let any of it remain until morning. And this was to teach them that they needed to renew their trust in the Lord every single morning, not to hold over blessings from day to day, but instead wake up each morning with a renewed idea that God is going to provide for us and for our families. So how is this principle of the manna reflected in Jesus' model prayer, the Lord's Prayer, where he taught his followers to say, give us today our daily bread? Well, we need to also do that. We're not We don't have bread falling from heaven. We don't have this manna from heaven now in 21st century America, but we still rely on the Lord for things like our jobs and for our families. And so when we talk about daily bread today, we're talking about the things that God gives us so that we can have life today. And so whether you believe in the Lord, whether you believe in Jesus or not, if you have a job, then God is giving you your daily bread. He is providing a way for you to live and survive because he loves humanity. Not because people loved him first, not because but because that is who he is. That is his character. Even for those who do not follow him, he provides for. Even those who reject him outright, he provides for. That is the kind of father that God is. And so how does our obedience to God's instructions display our trust in him? Well, if we pray to him and he blesses us, that is what faith in God ought to look like. And when I say bless, I don't mean monetarily, I don't mean prosperity gospel, I don't mean becoming rich, I mean providing. I mean meeting our needs, our basic needs. No one has gotten rich because they prayed the right prayer. People got rich because they prayed a prayer for God to bless them, and then they did the work needed in order to become rich. And they, either got lucky or were supremely blessed or whatever, but they put the work in. But God is going to provide for his children. And so if you pray for it, if you need it, God will provide it. That is who he is. That is how he is faithful to us. But our obedience to his instructions displays our faith in him, because what kind of child believes in their dad and believes that their dad will do these things and then disobeys them? If it's a disobedient child is who that is. And God is a gracious and faithful father. And so even when his children are being disobedient, he chastises them. He definitely does that to Israel. He makes them wander around in the desert for 40 years, but every step of the way, he does provide for them. And then we have further provision, verses 1-6 of chapter 17. The entire Israelite community left the wilderness of sin, moving from one place to the next, according to the Lord's command. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. So the people complained to Moses, "Give us water to drink." "Why are you complaining to me?" Moses replied to them. "Why are you testing the Lord?" So first off, Rephidim is a key stop for the Israelites on their way to the Promised Land. At Rephidim, they faced their first military enemy. And Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, gave him wise advice on leading the people well. And we can actually look at what that advice is. It's in Exodus 18, so we're not there yet, and we actually won't hit this. Exodus 18. Jethro visits Moses and tells him, Moses went to meet his father-in-law, and Jethro rejoiced and said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." And then he said, "Why is this thing that you are doing for all the? What is this thing you are doing for all the people? Why do you alone sit and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to Jethro, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws." And then Jethro says, "This thing is not good. Both you and the people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out, for this is too much for you. Now listen to me, and I'm going to give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God, and you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way in which they must walk. Moreover, you shall select from all these people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, and rulers of 50s. Basically, Jethro gives Moses the instruction to delegate some of the responsibilities to other righteous men in the group of the Israelites. It was too much on Moses to hear one after another of these complaints all day, every day. He was getting worn out, and so Jethro meets them there at Rephidim and gives Moses this message. And then in verse 2, Moses asks the question, why are you testing or tempting the Lord? The Israelites were trying to force God to prove himself. They were wrongly attempted to manipulate God's actions. They were saying, give us water. Instead of trusting in him, they were trying to tempt him or test him into giving them what they needed in the way they wanted, not the way that God was going to show them that he would provide. Let's keep moving. But the people thirsted there for water and grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you ever bring us up from Egypt and kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? Why didn't you leave us in Egypt? We had water there. We had the Nile River in Egypt. Why did you bring us here? So Moses cried out to the Lord, what should I do with these people? In a little while, they're going to stone me. Then the Lord answered Moses, go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take the staff you struck the Nile with in your hand and go. I am going to stand there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. When you hit the rock, water will come out of it and the people will drink. Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. So why were the people incensed at Moses to the point that he felt that his life was at stake? He was threatened. Well, because when people need something, and there's a dire need, then there is an anger that boils up. I have heard it said that mankind is only three skipped meals away from collapse, or three skipped meals away from chaos. That if a government were to deny food to certain people for 3 meals, so breakfast, lunch, dinner, it could be one day or 3 dinners across 3 days or whatever, that can cause a riot. That can cause an uprising. And well, they're without water now and they're thirsty, and people get antsy when there's a need that is not being met. And so their emotions were intensified by being out in the wilderness, being lost, being wandering, trying to find the promised land, being denied the promised land later. That hasn't happened yet, but it will happen. And so they were upset. And so Moses goes, God, what am I supposed to do? They're going to kill me. There is no water here. We're in the mountains. We're in the desert. There's no running water here. And God says, I'm going to provide. And so in what ways have you seen God provide for your needs or for someone you love? Grace and I have been supremely blessed in our time so far at Emory Baptist Church. We have never had a need go unmet, whether it be financially. We balance the checkbooks. We go, where's the money coming from? Where's the money going? And the dollars and cents don't seem to add up, and yet we still make rent. We still make our car payment. We still are able to live, and we don't understand how it always works, because God is good. And God provides, whether it be through members of Emory Baptist Church or whether it be through our jobs or whatever. God does provide for us. And it's great to see. I've also seen God provide for folks who are down on their luck, who have no money, and yet they are able to continue living. And there are senior adults who every week bring their tithe up to the church, usually like on a Monday. That's when they get out after Sunday. If they don't come to church on Sunday, they are faithful to bring their tithe check to the church. These are people on fixed incomes who don't have a lot to begin with, who are still giving, and God blesses them greatly and provides for them greatly because of their faithfulness to him. And so the challenge, the message today is to have faith in God, because he will take care of you. He will make sure that your needs are being met. He expects you to be obedient to him. He expects you to have faith in him. Those things aren't a given, but he will also be faithful when we are faithful to him. Thank you so much for being with me. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.